Thank you for joining us and welcome to Opportunities for Improving Transit Travel Through Standardized Payments. My name is Sarah Schramer, and I'm the Policy Director with the National Center for Sustainable Transportation. Housed at the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis, the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, or NCST, is part of the University Transportation Centers program administered by the U.S. Department of Transportation. The NCST provides national leadership in advancing environmentally sustainable transportation through cutting-edge research, direct policy engagement, and education of our future leaders.
Hey, Sarah, I'm not seeing your slides.
You're not seeing my slides?
No.
Oh my goodness, what happened? Thank you for pointing that out. One moment. Sorry about that. So UC Davis leads the National Center for Sustainable Transportation Consortium with partner centers at CSU Long Beach, Georgia Tech, Texas Southern University, UC Riverside, University of Southern California, and the University of Vermont. And just a couple of housekeeping notes. So we are recording this webinar, and we'll put the recording on our website in the next couple of days, along with the presentation slides and other related resources connected to the research. During the presentation, please use the question and answer or Q&A feature. It's available via a button at the bottom of the Zoom window to type in your questions. We're going to reserve time at the end of the presentation to go through as many questions as possible. And our speaker, Susie Pike, has also said that she's happy to answer any clarifying questions throughout the presentation. So feel free to raise your hand or ask a question in the Q&A, and I'll try to keep an eye on that, and we can pause as needed if something comes up while she's speaking. And lastly, you're going to see a quick survey at the end of the webinar for you to share your thoughts with us on today's presentations. And also to, we always enjoy hearing ideas about future webinar topics that you'd be interested in learning more about. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Susie Pike is the director of the Transit Research Center at UC Davis, and she's also research faculty at the UC Institute of Transportation Studies. Her research bridges individual behavior, agency decision-making, and sustainable transportation policy, with recent work investigating the use of microtransit, declines in the use of active transportation modes, the impacts of fare-free transit for youth, and the implementation of open-loop payments among transit operators. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share, and I will pass it over to Susie. Okay. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I think I'm set with my screens and everything, but please let me know if something doesn't look right. Thank you, Sarah, for the wonderful introduction to the project and for all of your hard work kind of in the background making this webinar happen this morning. Lots of NCST team members that are kind of behind the scenes, so their help is very much appreciated. So as Sarah noted this morning, I'll be presenting on a series of projects that deal with this kind of opportunity for improving transit travel through standardized payments. And when we're talking about standardized payments, really we're talking about what we call open loop payments. And I'll get into what that means in just a few minutes. I'm going to be presenting this morning on 3 different studies that are sort of in various stages of completion. The first 2 are more or less done, and then this third one here that you'll see, this agency-centered agency participation in the California Integrated Travel Project, is just wrapping up, and we're working on our final report for that as we speak. But the first study that I'll talk about is more passenger-centered. So this project stemmed from a concern that a transition to open-loop payments might not be accessible to those who are un- and underbanked, those who don't have access to traditional bank accounts or credit cards. And if that's what we're thinking about in terms of transit payments, how are we going to make that available to those travelers? And then the second two studies are more centered on agency concerns and also agency perspectives really on the potential to implement open loop payments and what are some of the challenges and what are sort of some of the thinking about the potential for open loop payments from the agency perspective. So, but before I dig into kind of the material of the different studies, I just wanted to give a little background on a couple of the elements that are relevant to this work. So first is this distinction between a closed loop and open loop payments. When we talk about closed loop payments, this is something that doesn't exist maybe in all different kinds of industries. It's somewhat more more of a payment system that we see in things like public transit. And so closed loop payment systems are not all identical, but they usually require a couple of steps before boarding the transit vehicle and actually having your fare collected or fare validated. These can happen in the reverse order, but one typical way is that we have our, our wallet with our cash and our credit cards and maybe our account based applications on our phone. And if we're entering into a closed loop system, we typically have to set up an account and load funds onto it, or we have to purchase some kind of mobile ticket or purchase a paper ticket from some kind of fare media or even a card. Right, it can be a card, but that's still a separate format for a payment for transit to happen in this kind of tap card or agency-based payment card. And there's differing degrees of kind of integration between online accounts and the use of payment kiosks and the ability to connect everything onto a mobile phone and have even a mobile ticket that is scanned for validation. But all of these different systems that have some kind of agency-based payment platform involved have this step. And then, step one and step two might be kind of more merged, but they could also be distinct, where we're then acquiring or preparing, at least bringing up and opening the fare payment media. And then when we board the vehicle, that fare payment media, which is its own media, either on the phone or in our hand, is then validated. And this is kind of as opposed to what we're talking about when we're talking about open loop payments, which is more what we might be familiar with in many other industries, where we are, we're purchasing something. In this case, we're purchasing the service of transit use, and we're able to use a payment method that we maybe already have in our pocket. We might already have it on our phone or in our wallet, and we're able to use that payment means directly at boarding without having these other steps involved beforehand. And so, if we think about this, cash, of course, is kind of a separate question, and we can talk about cash maybe in the discussion at the end. Here, we're really focused on the implementation of these open loop systems that use digital payment platforms, whether it's, recognizing a credit card or debit card or other kinds of accounts like Venmo or Cash App, things like that, at boarding on the, payment acceptance technology that's on board of the vehicles, rather than having these other steps in the process. And so why do we care, right? Why do we want this thing for transit? The way that things have been going, maybe have been working fine in the past. Tap cards are pretty flexible. It's not so hard. And, arguably this kind of extra step is one reason that we might consider open loop payments to be beneficial. But there are some other things that are also relevant. So the more efficient boarding, and this isn't exclusive to open loop payments, it does come with kind of tap cards or other kinds of electronic fare. But this allows passengers to board more quickly. It takes less time for each passenger to board the vehicle. Then this has benefits both for the passengers and the agency, because it speeds up the service a little bit. It can make arrival times and vehicle tracking somewhat more reliable, and it also has potential air quality benefits in that there's lower idling time. So the transit vehicle doesn't have to sit there for as long waiting for passengers to board. And these are areas where there's ongoing research to kind of understand how these efficiency benefits, how much kind of a gain do we get from them. As I noted, removing extra steps, not having to purchase fare media or load an account or these kinds of things ahead of time. And then some other things that we might not realize, there's a burden on transit users when it comes to discount eligibility verification. So that the lower income passenger or the senior passenger has to provide some kind of proof of their identity, some kind of proof of their eligibility in order to receive that discount. And so if I'm a traveler who uses multiple agencies, maybe the multiple agencies are talking to each other and allowing the same set of discounts for me as a senior citizen, or maybe they're not, or maybe their discounts are not even at the same. That we know that some agencies offer a senior discount at age 62, some at age 65. And so these kinds of variations are things that that can make it challenging for passengers to have to navigate these different requirements across different systems, and then not having the same kinds of discounts across different systems. And so if we use open loop payments and we transition to this kind of standardized payment process, one of the benefits is that once you're affiliating yourself with the means of payment, I'll talk a little bit about the California Integrated Travel Project in a few minutes, but one of the things that this program is working on is ways to, and has implemented in some pilot programs, are ways to automate this discount verification process so that a traveler who receives a discount receives that discount across transit systems and doesn't have to provide eligibility verification across some number of systems, and only has to provide it once, and then it's affiliated with them as an individual. And then another benefit of these systems is the ability for fare capping. And we might kind of, a way to think about fare capping is the way that we might think about like a rewards club almost. If you spend $20 in 1 week on transit fares, then you're not going to pay anymore. So your fare is capped at this amount. And this has huge benefits for those individuals who are lower income and may not be able to afford the upfront cost of paying for a monthly pass, but now they can still get that same benefit where they've used transit frequently enough so that they don't have to kind of continue to pay single fare every time, and then have that add up to be quite a lot more maybe than even the monthly pass might have been, just because they don't have that larger sum to pay for the monthly pass at the beginning. And so there's lots of different ways that fare capping could be operationalized. It can be done on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis, or other kinds of time frames, and different relationships to the base fare that's paid. But the main concept here is that when you're using the same means of payment, each time we can keep track of how much has been paid and then not require a traveler to pay more than a specified amount. Right, so these are some of the benefits that we might associate with open loop payments. But open loop payments also have potential challenges, right? So on the agency side, there are the requirements to install new equipment that has costs affiliated with it. There are also back-end technology and payments processing requirements. It may mean that an agency has to update to a new system or work with new vendors who provide those kinds of payment processing services that are now a little bit different, because we're paying for fares one at a time with a credit card rather than using credit cards to, say, load fare onto a tap card or something like that. So different system, different requirements, potentially new vendors, new contracting. These are the kinds of things that we'll talk about a little bit more as we go on. And then because of all of these new requirements that might be affiliated with implementing open loop payments, there are staff time and capacity restraints, constraints that affect the ability of an agency to implement open payments. So this includes learning about the new systems and then implementing and maintaining them once they are in place. Right, and as I noted, working with vendors. And then one aspect that's kind of buried in the middle here on this slide is the vehicle location information. And so if a transit fare is calculated based on where someone boards and where they get off, we also need to be keeping track of where vehicles are located in real time. And while this might be easy for some agencies, you know, if we think about in the Sacramento area or the Bay Area here in California, but one of the projects that Cal ITP has been working on recently is within some of our more rural counties where there might be, you know, foothills, and it's a little difficult to maintain internet connections. And so they've been looking at satellite internet connections in order to enable vehicle location. And it's not the area that I focus my work on, but I think it's very interesting to kind of just think about and be aware of all of these different pieces that we're trying to have come together. And I think there's some, you know, these are certainly challenges for the agencies, but in some ways we want to see agencies able to kind of advance and move forward with these innovative things. All right, so I've mentioned the California Integrated Travel Project a couple of times, and I just want to give a brief rundown of what they do and who they are for those participants today who might not be as aware. I borrowed this image from their website. I think it kind of captures the three areas that they focus on, although they certainly are expanding their kind of program over time. So there are two names that you might hear. They are both part of the California Department of Transportation, but they're also affiliated with the State Transportation Agency. And these are the California Integrated Travel Project and the California Integrated Mobility Program. Their key programs involve enabling transit agencies to implement open loop payments, but then also supporting and working on all of the different challenges that I noted. So things like contracting, discount verification, working on technology standards for the general transit feed specification or GTFS, as well as GTFS real time, which has to do with this vehicle location information. And so as we learn more through studies like mine and also through independent work conducted by Cal ITP about what the needs of transit agencies are when it comes to implementing open loop payments, we, you know, their program has evolved over time in order to address some of those challenges that are faced by agencies. I'll even say that they evolve and they move so fast that I'm probably not super up to date on exactly what they have going on right at the moment. All right, so lots of background information, but then to kind of get into now the studies that I've been working on that are looking at some of these questions. So this first study we conducted in July and August of 2021. We did an intercept survey, so coming up to transit travelers in the Davis area, travelers using, and the Sacramento area, travelers using YOLO Bus, Sacramento Regional Transit, and Unitrans. So those are the three main transit providers in our area. And we conducted surveys in Davis, Woodland, West Sacramento, and Sacramento. And we asked travelers about how much they're using transit, how they pay for it, how they pay for other things. And then we posed some kind of hypothetical questions about what kinds of payment tools they might be willing to use if they were implemented in public transit. And so I'm going to focus what I talk about today on those payment preferences, because that's one of the key questions here is whether an unbanked individual, so those people that don't have traditional bank accounts or credit cards, this is the central theme of the study, was to understand whether those individuals would be able to adapt to an open loop payment system that kind of relied on the use of credit cards or debit cards as a means of payment. So we asked travelers about first how they pay for transit now, and then we also asked, it's a little bit hard to see maybe what kinds of means of payment are offered by their agency today. And then we dug into questions about what kinds of payment methods people would be willing to use. Right, and so here you can see that travelers, unbanked individuals are more likely to use things like prepaid debit cards or government-issued prepaid cards, while as individuals with bank accounts were more likely to use things like mobile phones and debit cards from their bank. And it's important what people are using already came to be an important consideration for them in terms of what they would be willing to use. And so we asked about a number of different potential payment options for public transit, and whether the survey participant would like to use the option, would not like to use, or if they already use. And largely the options that we presented are ones that were not available in the transit systems that we were looking at. And so you can see the already used counts and percentages are generally quite low. And so we'll focus a little bit more. And if you're interested in kind of the statistical significance, I have the p-values here, and those are for tests of the distribution of respondents who said they would like to use or would not like to use based on these different categories. So if they have used the program in the past, if they or if they are un- and underbanked. And so from this first chart, what we can see is that those who have bank accounts were somewhat more likely to have used mobile phone payments. So there's an error here on the slide. It says use benefits, but it should say have used mobile phone payments before. They're more likely to want to use mobile phone payments. So 59% of those who are banked would and have used mobile phone payments before are likely to want to use mobile phone payments for transit. And then for unbanked individuals, many of them have not used mobile phone payments, and similarly, they report that they would not want to use them moving forward in transit. So we asked similar questions about various alternative means of payment, including credit card. And credit card was a little bit more evenly distributed. So there's statistical significance in the differences for the total population among those who have used credit cards in the past and who haven't used credit cards in the past, but somewhat less of a difference between unbanked individuals, and then some difference between banked individuals. But here, what's really important again is that those who have used credit cards in the past 12 months are much more interested in continuing to use credit cards to pay for, would be more interested in using credit cards to pay for transit than those that haven't, that don't already have access to credit cards. And then the same outcome for prepaid government cards, although prepaid government cards we see are more preferred by those who are unbanked. They're used by more of those who are unbanked. And again, it's this kind of one of the key outcomes that we're seeing from this study is that people who are familiar with different means of payment want to use those means of payment going forward and for paying for transit. We talked about at the beginning the sort of extra steps that are involved when we have a closed loop system in transit. And even though some of these means of payment, right, all of the kind of financial tools that we might use have some steps involved, right? We have to open a bank account, we have to get our card, these various kinds of things. If we're already doing these things as part of the process for paying for everything else that we do, it's not an added step that we have when it comes to public transit. It's something that's kind of already built into our routine, something that we're already familiar with. And so I think that that's why we see these results, that people are generally interested in using the means of payment that they have been already using. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. So some of the challenges with payment tools that were noted in this study included things like for mobile phone payments. Actually, the circle there is in the wrong spot. It should be circling the Wi-Fi. So mostly people reported that they have challenges or concerns about having Wi-Fi availability and how that might impact their potential to pay with their mobile phone. And then when it came to government prepaid cards, we saw more individuals, and it's not a ton more, but more individuals reporting that they had a challenge with knowing where they could get the cards, and then also challenges related to identity concerns as part of the potential problems or things that they expect to encounter as an issue when it comes to prepaid government cards. And then just to wrap up this first study related to and unbanked individuals and interest in different payment methods, I dug a little bit more into using phones for transit payments and using government issued cards for payments in a model, and found that these factors were important. So level of income, whether we're unbanked, so those who are unbanked are less likely to want to use a phone-based payment. Those who are unbanked are more likely to want to use the government issued card. Those with higher incomes were more likely to report that they would be willing to use phone-based payments. Those with these kind of moderate income categories were less likely to say that they would want to use a government issued card. And I'll note that although these income categories seem they're on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of income, the largest portion of our sample was actually in the lowest income category, the less than 25,000. And so if we think about it with respect to that, those individuals who had less than 25,000 annual income were more likely to want to use the government card. And fee is a challenge in both cases. And I think that there were a couple of other challenges in different models that we estimated. And I think that what we see here is that those who are familiar with the means of payment are more likely to say that they'd be willing to use it for transit, but also they're more familiar with some of the challenges that might be faced. And so they've either kind of figured out how to address it, or they recognize that it's a challenge, but they're still willing to use the payment anyway because, for some reason or another, it works well for them despite whatever challenges they may encounter. Okay. All right, so the main takeaway from that first project is really that people want to use the kind of means of payment that they already use, even when there might be challenges. And so I know we're I want to leave lots of time for questions and discussion at the end. So I might not get through here all of the material that I have on the agency side, but I'm certainly happy to dig into it more during the discussion, or I have a ton of information at the end about additional resources beyond today's webinar, where people can have access to the reports and the publications that have come from these projects. Okay, so the other side of this question, the other part that we're thinking about when we're thinking about open loop payments and transit is the agency perspective, right? It's all well and good that travelers want to use the means of payment that they already use. I can certainly relate to that. I use my credit card or my phone to tap to pay for everything. I love it when I can go somewhere, and there are some places we can go now, right, in the US and in California where you can tap to pay with your credit card or your phone for transit. And so it's great. It's very easy to do that. But is it easy for the agencies to make that available? And the answer is really that it varies. And so that's what these next two studies were really all about. So thinking about whether some agencies or agencies with particular characteristics are more able or less able to implement open loop payments, what kinds of challenges are found when it comes to implementing open loop payments, and then whether some of the programs that are offered by Cal ITP that I noted before whether agencies are aware of these programs and interested in using them to implement open loop payments or some of the other kinds of elements that would support the implementation of open loop payments. So in this first study, we had a fairly small sample, only 21 agencies participated, but largely most of them had considered or were currently considering or even in the process of implementing open loop payments. At that time, there weren't any yet that had implemented open loop payments, and then our first agency here in California, Monterey Salinas Transit, was just kind of starting to roll out their pilot program implementing open loop payments. So it's no surprise that none reported implementing it, but at any rate, just to kind of show where the agencies were at. And then we asked about a number of different questions related to outcomes that may occur with the implementation of open loop payments. And so you'll see the dark blue and yellow bars are bars of agreement. And so we see a good amount of agreement with the statements that it would improve operational efficiency, that it would allow for easier passenger transfers, and then we see more disagreement for some of our more negative statements, right? The next one, difficult to implement across multiple modes, somewhat more neutral, neutral standing from the agencies on that one. But then if we look further down the list, we do see some concern about improving discount eligibility verification. And so this is certainly one of the areas that Cal ITP is working on and that we recognize as a challenge with open loop payments, but potentially can be addressed with the right kinds of systems in place. And then the very last statement here, increase the risk of passenger robbery. Again, a little bit more disagreement, right? But this statement has this kind of negative sense of increasing risks for passengers. So generally positive perspectives, although there are some areas where there's neutral sentiment or some concern. And then we also asked agencies about whether or not any of these challenges would be challenges for them in the implementation of open loop payments. And so here I circled the top challenges, the challenges that were reported by 50% or more of the agencies in the sample. So the back-end payment infrastructure, the technological complexity, right? I mentioned this kind of new systems, new different vendors that they're going to have to work with, the costs of the equipment, staff capacity, and then just the actual equipment installation, right? And then there are additional challenges here that were notable but selected by a smaller percentage of the agencies in the sample. And let's see, I'm gonna move on to some other questions that we asked in the survey and kind of just give a high level summary. So we asked the participants in the study if they expected support for open loop payments from these different local groups that would be affiliated with their agency. And by and large, we saw that the survey participants expected support from all of these different groups. So from planners, local government, the operations teams, passengers, and then just very few that said they would expect not having support from those different groups. And many also that said neutral, but at least we're not seeing this lack of support come up very much. And then similarly, a good amount of interest with 50% or more of the agencies saying that they would be interested in shared tools for payment management, for data management, and then procurement cost sharing. And this is one of the things that Cal ITP has really worked hard on, is getting contracts in place with different vendors at the state level so that transit agencies can kind of pick from a menu of vendors to implement the various aspects of open loop payments. So from the onboard equipment that is used for fare validation to the to the back end kind of technologies and systems that verify payments and all of these other aspects. So they've got different vendors and different state level contracts in place. We can talk more about that in the discussion. And then indeed, some of the agencies have had help from Cal ITP, not all related to open loop payments, but these are a number of the things that Cal ITP offers assistance with. I think, Sarah, you can jump in. I know we are coming up on the amount of time that I was going to present this morning, so I don't want to go over if there are some good questions and discussion that we could jump into, but I'll just introduce maybe this third study, and then if we get more into that during the discussion, that's great. Or if we kind of circle back and touch on some of the other things that I've talked about thus far, that's great too. So this first agency-based study really showing that agencies have interest in open loop payments. There are challenges, and maybe there are areas really where Cal ITP can offer support and help kind of overcome some of those challenges, although they don't offer funding directly, which can be certainly one of the challenges. And then in this third study, we were digging into these questions a little bit more about agency capacity and agency interest, right? So we see a lot of interest, but we also see challenges. And so we're trying to kind of disentangle how these two things work together to lead to whether or not agencies actually implement or plan to implement open loop payments. And so I'm not going to go through this study in detail because I know we're kind of coming close to running out of time, but I'll just point to maybe one result that we got from this study. We use a process called factor analysis, where we look at how different statements, so things that we might ask an individual responding to a survey, their level of agreement with, or how high they might rate something. And so as a barrier in this case, so we asked about whether these different things were barriers to the implementation of open loop payments. And so things like capital expenses, operational costs, concern for cash dependent or unbanked customers, right? So trying to link back to that potential issue with open loop payments. And so what you'll see here really is that the main kind of result here is that the questions that we asked about barriers are one of the factors that relates to capacity. And so we see those statements related to barriers all kind of grouping together and contributing to this concept of barriers to open loop payments. And then we see the second set that has to do with how open loop payments lines up with other agency priorities. And so here, the agencies that reported higher priorities, we can kind of think of that as having lower interest or ability maybe to lower interest in implementing open loop payments. And so we can see that for those agencies that noted different priorities as being higher, these agencies all kind of have similar responses to those questions. And so we see this kind of other priorities being important, except for this payment integration, right? You can see there's the negative sign there. So, but the main takeaway here really is that capacity, so this kind of presence of barriers or absence of barriers, is distinct from the interest. And so trying to disentangle these two elements that might contribute to the implementation of open loop payments. And then just to kind of wrap up, as I've noted, in all of the studies, we see some degree of openness and interest in open loop payments, but we are balancing that with these challenges and kind of thinking about the ways that that these challenges might be addressed either through Cal ITP or through other means. I think it's fascinating to follow the way that the financial industry has really made more and more tools available for those who are un- and underbanked that that don't require the kind of traditional bank account route, that don't want to go the traditional bank account route. There are more and more financial tools available, lots of peer-to-peer payment platforms and things like that. And those platforms now are accepted in many of the same locations that we think of regular, credit cards or bank-backed debit cards and things are accepted. So it's really interesting to see, right? We have Cal ITP working on the challenges on one side, but also the financial tools kind of industry working on things in other ways. And it's great to follow kind of what's happening in that space and as it relates to the ability for passengers to adopt open loop payments. And then I just have a couple of more slides here. I won't go through this, but lots more information, and I believe we'll post the slides. So a bunch of links here to background information about the projects and some of the publications and reports. And then I just want to give a huge thank you to the folks that have worked on these studies with me here at UC Davis, Molly D'Agostino, Juan Matute at UCLA, and John Danielle Safores at UC Irvine, all my co-principal investigators, and of course, folks at Cal ITP and the different transit agencies, as well as a number of undergraduate and graduate student research assistants. All right, so with that, I'm gonna I think turn it over to Sarah, who's gonna moderate questions and discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susie. That was a really great presentation. And we do have some questions coming in the Q&A, so I think I'll just get to them, in the order that they were posted. So the first question from Jacob Wasserman: is there a way to set up an account such that a user can get the benefits of fare capping even if they use a different credit card or fare card for different trips? Is any agency exploring this?
I can't say that there's no agency that is exploring this, but to the best of my knowledge, I think most of the agencies that are trying to do that are doing it with where you need to pay with the same card for all the trips. But I know this isn't your question, but one thing that is kind of exciting is that a number of the agencies that are implementing open loop payments and fare capping are trying to find ways so that at least families traveling together can all tap with the same card. And so you wouldn't need to have, each individual family member with their own card and their own account, right? That the trips that are made as a group together. But Jacob, probably there are some that are exploring that, but I don't have an example yet.
Well, we have a follow-up from another participant here on the webinar. He says, to add to this, one credit card could be used as a card or in a mobile wallet, for example, Google, Apple, Samsung Pay. It would be the same card to the user, but would likely look like a different card to the payment processor or agency. So it seems like this is an important UX issue. Curious to hear what agencies are doing to look at this or educate users on how to not use multiple payment methods.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the payments industry. My assumption is that actually, because it would ultimately hit on the same account, it would be, it would be recognized that it was the same account, whether it's, using the digital version on your phone or the, card-based version of the credit card. And so I haven't heard that issue come up from any of our surveys or discussions with Cal ITP. So again, really my assumption is that it might not be a problem, but certainly something kind of food for thought to think about in future studies.
Great, thank you. And the next one: how can unbanked people have credit card accounts?
Right. So we defined unbanked people in our study in the same way that the FDIC does in their, they do every other year a survey of consumers of financial products, et cetera, across the US. And so they define them as someone that hasn't used a checking account or a bank account in the past 12 months. And then when it comes to credit card, they could have had bank accounts before and had a credit card. They could have had some other means of acquiring a credit card that precluded them still from being considered banked, but they have a credit card at their disposal. It could also be, could potentially be a shared credit card or something like that. So it's not impossible.
All right, thank you. And most Visa, MasterCard gift cards have a $5.95 fee added whenever one is purchased at a retail outlet. Did the study look at transit agencies waiving that fee at the transit agency's ticket booth?
So I think the idea with the prepaid debit cards in this study would be that the cards would not be sold through the transit agency. These would be prepaid cards that individuals already were utilizing, if they were just kind of the industry-based prepaid cards. And there's some discussion about kind of ways to support individuals purchasing these cards or having access to these cards, and also government programs, right? Where access to these digital financial tools might be provided through a government entity. And then those fees would, we wouldn't expect those fees to be associated with that. If that answers the question.
I think so, yeah. And again, if so as Susie's answering questions, if anything needs additional clarification, please go ahead and type it in the Q&A, and we can, elaborate further. Let me see here. So we got to that one. So next in the queue, I heard fees are a challenge for both phone-based and government-issued payments. Can you elaborate on that? What kinds of fees are users encountering? What part is the challenge?
Sure. Yeah, I think to some extent this is there's maybe a need for education, and there's a need for a recognition that these things are evolving. And so we didn't really dig into what kinds of fees travelers are expecting, but we do know that overdraft fees and things like that are a problem among those who choose not to have bank accounts. That is oftentimes one of the reasons, is to avoid fees for things like overdraft. And so potentially we're seeing a concern that there might be fees for using a mobile phone to pay, or for using prepaid government cards to pay. But whether or not there are actually fees would depend a little bit on the specifics of the system that was being used, the specifics of the card that was being used, or the phone application. But I think largely it's a need for kind of more education on how some of those things work. Similarly for Wi-Fi, right? We can pay with our phone even if we don't have Wi-Fi service, as long as the payment entity is able to connect with our phone or with our card in order to accept the payment. And so all of the people that noted Wi-Fi concerns, it could be that they think that maybe they can't pay if they don't have Wi-Fi. It could also be that they're concerned that they won't know what their balance is, or they won't know how much they have used that card. And that, I think, is a real concern, right? If we don't have Wi-Fi, and we know that many people have access to smartphones but don't have data plans necessarily, and so they may be without Wi-Fi. And so keeping track of how much a particular payment card has been used certainly makes sense as a concern, but being able to pay is less of a concern. So at any rate, just to say that I think there are some needs for sort of updated information, and transit agencies, if they're wanting passengers to use these means of payment, I certainly have the opportunity to provide some of that to fill in some of those gaps in terms of the education.
All right, thank you. And a couple more questions here in the Q&A. What challenges do small to medium-sized transit agencies face when considering the implementation of open loop payment systems?
The challenges for small and medium agencies. I mean, I think that we saw first to say that the agencies that have participated in my studies have largely been the small to medium, and fewer of the large agencies. I don't think we've had you know, in California, LA Metro or BART or Muni participate in these studies, maybe one of them. So largely the agencies that are represented in our surveys are on the smaller side. And I think the challenges that we know, you know, the things like the back end technology, the procurement of the technology, right, the costs of it, as well as the contracting, all of those things are relevant to the small and medium agencies, and arguably less relevant to the larger agencies who have more capacity, who have maybe made more steps along the way, right? Some of the TAP systems that have been implemented can be kind of turned on to accept open loop payments, and so there are fewer barriers for the largest agencies, and so much of my work has really been around the smaller and medium agencies.
And there's sort of a flip to the question. So what opportunities or strategies could facilitate the adoption of open loop payment systems for the same size transit agencies, particularly those with limited resources?
Yeah, so certainly, you know, we could have multiple webinars, and I know some folks on the line are probably have a more expertise in areas of transit finance than I do, but certainly I think having funding available to do things like this and finding ways, you know, to support agencies financially to, you know, for all of the different aspects, right? To purchase the equipment and implement the equipment, to train staff and increase staff capacity to operate and maintain these new kinds of systems. All of those things do require financial support. But also I think the programs that Cal ITP is working on and the evolving sort of nature of Cal ITP, I think speaks a little bit to recognizing some of the other challenges, right? Like agencies have to contract with vendors for all sorts of things. So why not make that process easier by doing what we have in California, these master service agreements where agencies can select from a number of different vendors that kind of fit their needs. And that takes away some of the capacity burden, right, by making the process simpler, and also does reduce the cost to some extent, right, because you have these kind of contractual agreements in place, and that can enable, you know, some of the smaller and medium agencies to participate. And so I would say, you know, look at some of the things that Cal ITP is doing. There's a whole slew of different programs that they have going on, and always expanding in terms of some of the ways that we could support smaller and medium agencies to move towards open loop payments.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think we got through all of the questions that came up during the presentation. We just have a couple minutes left, so I think I'll just maybe pull one or two questions from when folks were registering. You know, there's an option to ask the speaker in advance, so I've been collecting those. So let's see. So to what extent should open loop payments be developed with TNCs or micromobility options in mind to address first and last mile connectivity?
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of two separate questions, really. You know, the integration or the partnership between TNCs and transit, or micromobility and transit, certainly offer some of the first and last mile solution. We sometimes refer to these options as extensions of public transit, or just as public transit. Who were we talking to someone from Spin the other day, and they just talk about bike share as public transit, and I think that that's fantastic, right? We want to see the use of especially bike share, right? And so the payment piece is one thing, right? You can oftentimes pay for Uber or Lyft or bike share. I don't know that you can just walk up to all, you know, every bike share and just have to pay and jump on. And so this is maybe something that we should be exploring. Agreed. So there's the payment part. And then with Uber and Lyft, right, we typically have to make an account, but they have also gone to you know, taken steps to make that more accessible to cash paying customers by offering you know, at different points of sale, you can load value into your Lyft account using cash and have that available to you to then use Lyft. So the payment piece is one side, and then the integration and the potential for discounts is kind of on the other side. And so do we want to offer discounts for bike share or discounts for Uber and Lyft for people that are connecting to transit? And I've done, you know, some work on this topic, and I think that there are potential benefits, and it can improve outcomes for transit agencies in some cases, and it can potentially improve you know, emissions outcomes and outcomes for passengers, especially when we are filling in gaps either spatially with this first last mile question or temporally by offering services late at night or on weekends when there's lower demand but still some demand, and so being able to serve those passengers. So I think, right, like this is a large question. And I think on the one side, yes, we want to see open payments for all of these different things. And then to some extent, yes, we want to see some integration of these services and some potential, you know, subsidization or discounting of these connecting services in order to promote the use of transit. But I have a bunch of studies on this topic also that I kind of point folks to if they're interested in that, and I'm happy to kind of direct people to that.
That's great. Thank you. I kind of threw you a doozy at the end.
It's okay. All these questions, right? There's, you know, we need whole webinars and have done whole webinars on these different topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I can do, if you're okay with this, Susie, is, you know, you shared a slide at the end of the presentation with a bunch of additional resources. So we can add that to the event page just for easy access for folks.
Yeah.
Again, we are going to have this webinar recording and the slides available on the website as well. And then one other thing that we like to do is try to get as many of these questions and their written answers in sort of a Q&A transcript on the website for future reference, because there are some questions that we didn't get to from the registration that could be helpful for folks. So please keep an eye out for that for folks who are still on the line with us. And our student assistant just added a link to the webinar evaluation survey. Please take a minute to fill that out for us. It really helps us kind of figure out how to continue improving these webinars. We really appreciate the feedback. And I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Susie for sharing your work. This is really a really important topic, and we're so glad that you were able to share it with us.
Great.
So.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, so much for organizing and everyone for participating. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to chat offline or.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And yeah, reach out to me or to Susie if any follow-up questions come up. All right. Thank you very much.